I'm standing here under the big trees beneath the bridge. It's a place that feels like it's permeated with ghosts. I think there was a camp here. I think many people died here. I get the feeling of it. It's a place of very deep spiritual feeling. While I'm here, I just want to reflect a little on the Iran war, what's happening right now. 1st of May 2026. It's a time of incredible uncertainty. I want to give you a perspective on it, which may be completely wrong, but let's just try it anyway. Let's just throw it out there, okay? I think that this war between the United States and Iran is a bit of a mirage. I don't think it is what it appears to be. I think very terrible things have happened, don't get me wrong. A lot of people have died, a lot of stuff has been blown up. Israel has invaded Lebanon again. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed and the price of oil has gone up dramatically, and these are all very real and serious things. But the state of war between Iran and the US is, I think, somewhat fake. I think it is something of a scam. I think there are entities profiting from it, and I think they are managing it, stage managing it, and I think at some point they're going to end it. It's a type of psyop. And these psyops are always done with specific goals and a specific timeline in mind. And then when they finish what they're planning to do, it ends. I saw it happen with COVID. I saw it happen with Afghanistan, Iraq, the whole war on terror thing. Everything happened in a kind of pre-planned rollout. What we're seeing with the Iran war is an extension of all that. It's just the next phase of that. And we knew it was planned. We heard rumours of it 20 years ago, back in 2006. They were talking about Iran being next. It just took them that long to get here. But rather than this being the beginning of a catastrophic World War III, I don't think it's anything like that. Here's what I put to you is what's going to happen. This may be a little shocking if you haven't been doing the kind of research and thinking that I have. I think that Iran is going to pivot to the US. I think that a lot of what's been happening is something of a pantomime. I think that this so-called hardline IRGC regime that's in Iran, that's posturing, is part of a theatre. And it's being drawn out to make it look realistic. It's being drawn out by both sides to make it look realistic. But I think there are back channels in play, and I think Iran is going to pivot to the US. This is going to be very hard for a lot of analysts to accept, because most of the analysts are tied to political agendas, and they want to see this as some kind of war of independence and sovereignty, some sort of noble thing that Iran is engaged in, and I wish it were. But history tells me something quite different, and the history of Iran tells me something quite different. Let's talk about the history of oil exploration in Iran. Iran's oil was discovered by a team working under an Englishman, an entrepreneur, by the name of William Knox Darcy. He was a rich man from Australia. He was actually born in England, went to Australia, made a lot of money in gold in Queensland, and then sold his gold to invest in a project in Iran. Wild. The project was to find oil there, because they knew that there was oil to the north. The Russians had oil, and the Russian oil fields were not far from Persia, and Persia was not under direct control of Russia. Russia had a lot of influence there, but Persia was a separate kingdom. And they were poor. they didn't have resources to do oil exploration, and they didn't even have any kind of expertise in it. They had no idea. And this was the turn of the century, when oil was becoming critical. The British moved from using coal to using oil on their ships. That was the Kanchanaburi train, just punctuating my presentation here. I think it's about to come across the bridge. Can you believe that? That's a real train running on the tracks and the bridge that was created by Allied POW slaves more than 80 years ago. Fantastic piece of engineering. Now let's just get back to what I was talking about there, the discovery of oil in Persia. This rich guy from Australia went over to Persia and paid money to the king, the Shah, to begin exploring for oil. There had been stories, there had been folklore of oil kind of coming up out of the ground, like bitumen, tar seeping up out of the ground. The Russians had discovered oil to the north, and oil was becoming critically important. This was the real beginning of the age of oil. And William Knox Darcy was sharp. He knew that there was an incredible future in this, and he just staked his whole fortune on it. And he signed a contract with the Shah of Persia. There was a 60-year contract. Can you believe that? A 60-year contract. And I think the upfront amount was something like £15,000. And then the terms of the contract were, if oil were discovered, that Persia would get 15%, roughly. There's a spider on my phone. He's right on top of my phone. Spider removed. So the Shah of Persia jumped at this, right? It was actually a great opportunity for them. It was a great deal for them because they didn't have to do anything. The foreigners were going to do it all, and they were just going to get paid a flat rate % for the next 60 years. Now, some people in retrospect think that wasn't fair. You could debate that. But at the time, it seemed like a good deal. And if you just reflect on it, from a common sense point of view, it's actually not a bad deal. You don't have to do anything, just sit back and let the foreigners come in and do all the work, and then you get 15% of something that could be huge, and it was huge. But it took about 6 or 7 years before they finally struck oil, and William Knox Darcy spent all his money, nearly went bankrupt. He had to then go into debt with another company. He had to borrow more. And then finally, in about 1908 or 9, that's when they struck oil. They struck oil in the south of Iran, and it turned out to be a massive oil field. And from there, they did further exploration, found more oil, and it just kept coming and kept coming. And Iran quickly became, like, I think at that time, the main source of oil in the world. Like, it was a really incredible find. And because of that, the British Empire got directly involved in it, and a company was formed called BP, British Petroleum, which was completely based on the concession of oil in Persia. And BP, of course, became one of the major multinational oil companies of the world. So it's very important to understand historically that Persia was really right at the center and the beginning of the age of oil for the whole world, particularly for the Western powers. It was particularly significant for Western powers, especially for the British, who were using the oil to power their ships, and of course they had the empire at that time. They had a global empire. Another reason it was extremely important was because when the British consolidated their control in Persia, that actually kept the Russians in check. And this was also an incredibly important thing at that time. It was a very important part of the geopolitics of that time, just as it is now. Containing Russia has been an important geopolitical objective for Western powers for more than 120 years. And I put it to you that the current war in Iran is also about containing Russia to some extent. But even more than that, the war at present is about pivoting Iran away from China and towards the West. But let's just continue with the historical narrative a bit. So, oil was discovered around 1908. BP was formed. The British Empire got involved. And they were just pumping it out of Iran for decades. It was a great setup. And this oil coming out of Iran supplied both the British and the Americans, and was surely a very important factor in winning the First World War and the Second World War. Because the Allied powers retained control and influence over Iran through all of that period. But it all started to change after the end of World War II. And this was a period of time when countries were becoming independent. Countries were finding their freedom and their sovereignty all over the world. Africa, Southeast Asia, everywhere. India, of course, let's not forget. So you had all of these independence movements. Persia was nominally an independent country, but they were under a lot of control. The oil concession there allowed the British to basically do whatever they want. And they ran the whole thing. They didn't train the locals much. They didn't really provide much input into local infrastructure, developing expertise, all that kind of stuff. They basically just went in there to take the oil, and they managed the whole process. And this started to really grate on the Iranians post World War II. And you started to get a nationalist movement developing there, just like you saw in many other countries. And this was led in that period by a man by the name of Mossadegh, who rode to power in a democratic mode, but based on the idea of sovereignty, based on the idea of Persians regaining their dignity. The country was now to be called Iran. The reason why he was elected was because people really supported that, and they saw this as the future of Iran as being self-managed. So after Mossadegh was elected, he just unilaterally nationalized the oil. And this was like a bombshell for the British. I mean, first it was breach of contract. This happened in 1950, right? So I think the concession, the oil concession, had at least another 20 years or so to go, right? And they struck oil in 1909. Yeah, the concession would have gone through till about 1979. So they were robbed of 20 years of their original contract. And they just didn't accept it. And one thing we don't actually hear about when we hear politically motivated analysts talking about this period of history is we don't really hear the British side of it much. We don't hear the American side of it much, which is that they just felt the Iranians were being lazy and cheeky to unilaterally breach a contract and seize all that infrastructure that had been decades in development. And they weren't going to accept it. There was no way they were going to accept it. So what they did is they used the CIA, which was the newly formed CIA at that time, to foment dissent. And they did find groups who were willing to go along with that. They found groups within Iran. They probably paid money into those groups. And they engineered a coup. And the nationalist movement was quashed. And the Shah was reimposed. And then everything went back to the status quo. The British were back in control. The oil concessions stayed in place. The geopolitical alignment continued. And the West was pretty happy with that until mid-70s, when the Ayatollah Khomeini started his little revolution, bringing together student protesters in Iran, in Tehran, and then finally joining the revolution in 1979, leading the revolution, and then taking the hostages, the US Embassy, and then, of course, negotiations took place and finally the hostages were released, but Iran went onto a permanent kind of bad list. Sanctions were imposed, which have been in place ever since. And the Western powers have never really gotten over the grudge they have against both the nationalists and the Iranian revolutionary movement for destroying their investment in Iranian oil. Iran used its massive oil wealth then to develop nuclear energy. And people would say, well, they have no need for nuclear energy. They've got so much oil, why would they do it? Well, in my opinion, and this is also what I've gleaned from my own research, is that Iranian nuclear research was done deliberately to provoke the West. As a demonstration of power and to create the impression that they might have nuclear weapons. They've always denied wanting nuclear weapons, but it then becomes a bargaining chip. Now, in the last 40 years, what has happened is China has arisen. And because of all the sanctions against Iran from the rest of the world, Iran pivoted to China and was able to bypass the sanctions, was able to supply ships directly to China, to supply oil to China. And so Iran became the major supplier of oil to China. And that continues right to the present day. Now, getting back to this war, this what I would call a phony war. I think the goal here is to cut the Chinese-Iranian relationship. And I think Trump is going to offer the Iranians massive inducements, bribes if you like, to do that. They're going to cancel all the sanctions. They're going to give Iran some more money. This was already happening under Obama. And Trump made a big deal about cancelling that arrangement. But the arrangement that he's going to do is going to be even better for Iran than the previous one. Meanwhile, we have this theatre of war. We have this pretend war, which of course is very bad. And war is a racket, and war is a scam, and it's a disgusting, terrible thing. But I don't think it's going to end up being a ground war. I don't think it's going to be World War III. I think it's looking more like another psyop, another scam, which has the effect of bringing Iran into the American orbit and pushing China out. And where we may see the real war happen, the real war that's coming, is going to be centred perhaps on the Pacific, on Taiwan. Winston Smith, 5EP, signing off.